Welcome back home, church. We're continuing with our study of the Gospel of John this week, and what I wanted to do before we got into it too much was actually maybe take a step back and look at the context of what this book is all about. I mean, after all, if you're somebody who's new to Christianity or new to the Bible, you're probably looking at this and saying, we have 4 different Gospels that are all fundamentally talking about the same guy. Why do we have all these different Gospels? You see, what you find out when you study these different books of the Bible is that each book actually has a different emphasis, something they're trying to bring out. And when we look at the Gospel of John, what we really have is this study of something that's called semiotics. And you said, I had to even look at my notes right here because it's not really something I normally look at. But it's really interesting because what you're doing here is you're actually studying the signs that you see revealed through the life of Christ, and really the study looks throughout the entire Bible. Well, John is trying to do something very interesting here. You see, what he's doing is he's actually highlighting the fact that through the life of Christ, you can see 7 different distinct signs that just remove any shadow of the doubt that Christ is, in fact, who he says he is. And so what he's trying to do is he's trying to set this stage to do what, his moniker really says, he should do. He's oftentimes called John the Evangelist. He's trying to evangelize to us and say that Jesus Christ is, in fact, who we say he is. And this is how we know it, is through these various signs that we are given. Now, throughout the book of John, you see several of these. And what we're going to do in a second is I'm going to put a few of these different signs, really all 7 of these signs, on your screen with the references. And what I want you to do is I want you to sit here and look at these different signs. And if you're familiar with the stories, maybe just summarize them in your group. Otherwise, you have the references there and you can read them on your own. But what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at these things and identify what about these signs identify that this is an individual who comes from God. It's an individual whose life can't be explained any other way other than the fact that he is sparked from the same being as the Father. Last week, Pastor Doug did a good job of going through John 1:1, and in that we heard a lot about the Logos, or the Word. And that's so interesting because something, just in case you need a little recap or a little refresher, is that it means something to both the Jews and the Gentiles that points to the fact that Jesus is in fact God, one and the same individual. You see, to the Jews, saying Logos meant that it was the will of God. It was the command of God. And that's something that, we see borne out time and time again in Psalms. There's a few of them that won't be in your notes, but, Psalms 33:6, we end up saying the heavens were made by the word of the Lord and all the stars by the breath of his mouth. Another one in Psalms 147:15-18, he sends his command throughout the earth. His word runs swiftly. He spreads snow like wool. He scatters frost like ashes. He throws his hailstorms like crumbs. Who can withstand his cold? He sends his word and melts them. He unleashes his winds and the water flows. You can see the Father's essence is in his word. And in fact, Christ is that essence. He's that same thing. And to the Gentiles, it would have meant the same thing because the word Logos connected God to earth. That's what it did, is they looked at the Logos as being something that said this is the heavenly and this is the earthly, and the word is something that connects the two. And so you had this same connection. Yet what's interesting about this is that you had to have a Christ here because nobody could see the Father. This is something that we see borne out, and it's something that's described when you read John 1:5 and when you read John 1:10-11, and you can do that in your groups. It's on the next screen. But when you read that, what you see is that people couldn't see the Father. And because they couldn't see the Father, they had to have something. They had to have some entity, something to help them be able to see the Creator and to understand their God who loves them and wants to do so much for them. And so that's why it became necessary to have a Messiah. So when you put those two things together, what you have is that Jesus is the Father. They're one and the same. And in fact, he is the aspect of the Father that helps us to be able to see him. So as you just discussed, the world can be so blinded to who God is. And that's why, in fact, it becomes so necessary to have a Messiah. You see, to the individuals who were contemporaries of John and really had existed for generations before that, these were people who tried to find God or see God through their birthright. They tried to find God through their own choices and their own free will, to think that somehow they could earn their way or do good works in order to find God or see God. And still yet, you had other individuals who tried to justify themselves through the law. They tried to prove that they could be good enough and that they could follow all God's rules, and as a result of that, see God. But in fact, they couldn't. They were still blinded to who God truly was. And that's why it became so necessary to have a Messiah, because the Messiah became the light that could truly cut through the darkness. That is such a massive thought when you think about it, because if you think about what so many of us do today within our own ministries and what churches do and ministries do and whatever Christian group you have, so many people try interjecting themselves into it. They try saying, this is what I feel I want to do. This is what my passion is, or this is what I feel like I'm called to do. Instead of sitting here saying, I need to reflect Christ in these people's lives. And that's where the church and individual Christians start falling short, is when they try to interject themselves and themselves be the light, rather than instead trying to mimic Jesus Christ and mimic the love and the compassion of Jesus Christ, and to shine that light into a dark world. So as we look at this prologue going into the Gospel of John, what we can see here is that Christ is the Father. He is one and the same. He's no less powerful. He's not just a relative of God or an offshoot or something like that. He is in fact God. And it was necessary that God come down to earth in this form, because otherwise we couldn't see him on our own. Our own sin and our own distractions blinded us to who God truly was. And so that is why God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son to die for our sins, because there was no other way that we could truly understand how loving and compassionate this God was. This is what we're going to learn about in the Gospel of John. This is what it means to be a Christian. And when we talk about John the Evangelist, the writer of the Gospel of John, maybe now you'll start understanding why he's referred to as the evangelist, because this is the message. This is the Great Commission that we have all been put in charge and entrusted with sharing with the rest of the world. That Jesus Christ is Lord. And he's not Lord because he's an additional person that God sent. He is Lord because he is God, and he is the true demonstration of the fact that God so dearly loves us and wants to have a relationship and be reconciled with his creation. And we have the responsibility to be that light, not so that people can see us, but so people can see the light of the world. God bless, and you guys have a great week.